And someone's going to say, well, you know what, that was important to me. And if they've identified with you or the other side, I think that can be meaningful. That's really all I got.
I'm curious about the jailhouse in front of
Mhm.
I'm just assuming that the defense attorney try to make some hay. This is an informant. They're
Yes.
reliable.
The guy was spectacular. It was clear that he was telling the truth. I must say, though, that when they were talking about him, I did play, it's the only active thing I did was play devil's advocate, say, okay, let's talk about, do you think there's a possibility he got a benefit? I know there's no evidence of it. And, what do you think about his credibility? And everybody tried in, and I kind of took up for that side of it when I was in deliberations, but the questions were very quickly answered.
Was it on direct? You're not receiving any benefit at all? Was it that blatant? for
Yes,
everyone?
and it was also logical because he had been in prison. We knew his parole date, which was very shortly after he gave the statement to the homicide detective. And they figured that out logically. He contacted them on the date, they made it specific. He talked to him then, and he got out shortly thereafter. And I don't remember, I thought about saying this, but I think I chose not to. Did anybody write a letter for him? And I would assume that Rick would have brought that out if he'd known. We've had some issues with that recently, I know. But that did not come up, and I didn't inquire about that.
And y'all did punish him? Is that right?
We did punch him.
Were there any defensive mitigation areas that were presented, and how was that treated by the jury, if you recall?
No, there were not. The argument was, this guy's not right in the head. You guys can tell that. We're asking for leniency. We know we're going up to 25 at the minimum. We're going to die in prison, even with that sentence. And it was an hour deliberation. It quickly became a circumstance of, it was obvious this guy did this because he'd already been up twice before for the sentence. But he wasn't going back. And, his conduct after the fact kind of sadly showed that.
Any questions from the audience about this really serious case like this? Fascinating. What you got?
At about the same time when Pat was doing his jury service on a murder case, I was in a much more prosaic, generic domestic violence case in Judge Carahan's court. And my day of jury service, I show up at the panel in one of the rooms like this, firm in my conviction that I'll never be selected, thank God. And I'm just doing my duty by showing up. My greatest fear was that I might get over on the civil side, where I would have a greater likelihood of being on the jury. So when they called me in to go over to Judge Carahan's court, I thought, well, great. It's just a matter of listening to the voir dire and cutting out. I got things to do. I've done my duty. They'll never pick me. And I'm sitting there, and I'm like the last one. I get picked, and it's like, what? And it's like I did not want to be on the jury because I knew I was going to be pissing somebody off by the time this thing was over. And I would be blamed because I'm within, from the community. But the case was one of these domestic violence cases that was real old. It was like 2 years old. Boyfriend, girlfriend, he pushed me. I hit my head against the wall. The jury was kind of like, we got called down here for this. And in my opinion, without mentioning names, the prosecutors outlawyered the defense substantially, and in my critical opinion. The defense, we learned a lot about the lead defense attorney's military background and his biography. He didn't really touch much in the voir dire. That's pretty much what he talked about. And so he had an interesting strategy, I guess. The prosecutors more straight on with we got to do something about the cycle of violence and what you would anticipate they would probably say about it, but they just didn't have good facts. boyfriend, girlfriend 2 years ago pushing each other, a bunch of popcorn falls on the ground, and that's their signs of violence, you know, and we're sitting there. It was a weird panel that I was on, though. There were 2 lawyers, and also two people with engineering backgrounds. One engineer, and I think the other guy was a draftsman or whatever. But so we had engineers and lawyers. So I mean, we were that kind of panel. The thing that impressed me about it was how unfree you are as a juror. You are now herded around. First you're herded around from the general panel. Then once you get on, you can't leave. Your freedom is constricted. You know, and that's a weird it was a weird feeling for me, but it was interesting. When we got back into the jury room to deliberate, there was the other lawyer, who was a civil attorney from the Woodlands. She was into it, and now she could use her criminal law seminar background from law school, and which was fine with me, because at one point there was some loose talk about me being the foreman, and I immediately demurred. Did not want to take a leadership role whatsoever, and was very recessive, frankly, during deliberations, because I didn't want to have any big influence on it. But she picked up the torch and was certainly the forewoman of the jury. The problem was there just wasn't a lot of there in terms of the evidence, and the girl had moved on to Dallas. She was living up in Dallas, and the guy, they hadn't seen each other like in a year and a half, and there was no indication of any priors. The defendant did not take the witness stand, and there was just no good injuries. The complainant did testify. She did testify, and she described the injury that she had, that was the focus of controversy, was a little bump on the back of her head, and she described it as about maybe the size of her finger, and in the report it was the size of a golf ball. And so the defense had a little fun with that. So it seemed like the officers had maybe conceivably hyped it up a little bit, and it just was like, this thing seemed like it ought to be more suitable for the justice of the peace, people's court kind of situation. But it was very instructive for me, and just like Pat was talking about, the jury sees everything, and the reason, in my opinion, you see everything is because that's all you can do. You can't articulate, you can't leave. All you can do is watch and listen, and I'm sure it's more pronounced in a 12-man jury than a 6-man jury. But even with a 6-man jury, somebody on that jury is seeing everything in the courtroom. Even if you got 1 or 2 of them asleep, you're going to have at least 4 still, conscious, and they're picking up on everything, and they can be kind of critical of the lawyers. Ultimately, he was found not guilty, and there was some pressure to get it done before 6 o'clock, when the judge was saying, well, you can continue deliberating for another 15 minutes, or you can come back tomorrow morning. Well, that's a hard one, Judge. That did precipitate a verdict, and it was a very interesting experience. Although it did makes my blood run cold when I get a jury summons to show up. The idea of getting on something like what Pat was on, now if you're on salary, that's one thing. But if you're in private practice, you could get in one of these long trials, and then when you emerge, it's like, welcome to bankruptcy court, and you can't get anything done. It is as if you're either sick or in another country in terms of your practice. And I know we're not supposed to be concerned about that, but in point of fact, those of us in private practice, that issue will bubble up in your head as you think about your cases kind of festering away in your absence. So I made, frankly, the classic juror mistake of keeping my mouth shut during voir dire. I will assure everybody in this room, if I'm called for jury service again, I'm going to be one opinionated lawyer. I don't know what my opinion's going to be, but it's going to be pronounced. Somebody at the council table is going to think, maybe not so much with this guy. So I don't know what opinion I'll be taking, but I just sat there like a bump on a log, thinking, hey, they'll never pick me. And then what do you know? And I enjoyed the jury service in the sense that, you know, you're doing your duty, and it was interesting, and I'm glad I was able to do it. But it kind of reminds me of the story they say about Voltaire from the Enlightenment. At once he went with some of his colleagues to a male bordello and spent the evening there. Afterwards, he was questioned, and they said, "Well, did you find it interesting?" He said, "Yes." And, you know, it was quite interesting. And then they asked, "Well, are you going to go back? Will you do it again?" He said, "No, once a philosopher, twice a pervert." So that's kind of the way I feel about jury duty. You know, it's just kind of like, okay, if I'm called, I will serve, but I will serve in an opinionated fashion during voir dire. And if they want to put me on, then I will do my duty as an American citizen. But I would urge that think about it hard and fast if you get in one of these kind of trials that Pat's in, because you are constricted. That's what I remember vividly, is that you can't leave until it's over, and you have certain, you know, rules and regulations you got to follow. And you know, I've been doing a bunch of jury trials over the years and never really looked at it from the other point of view, but you are, in a way, kind of a prisoner to the dynamics of the case as a juror.
Did they trot out any social worker experts in your case?
No, there was no social worker expert. They didn't go quite. I mean, it was just. I don't even know what it was doing in county court. Really, it's one of those kind of deals that, like, it's like, I guess the guy would not plead. They couldn't dismiss, and finally they just had to try it.
You know, I used to always think, I formed an opinion later, it's like, you know, the state almost has like a double burden. You know, the first one is who cares on the misdemeanor, and the second one is then proof beyond a reasonable doubt. You know, because this situation seems like, you know, if you believe that she had a little thumbnail-sized injury to the back of her head, if you believe that, then, you know, blah blah blah. So do you think the driving thing in your case with your jury was who cares? You know?
Well, there was this kind of general feeling of, poor girl, I thought she'd never shut up. You know, it's like, you know, okay, get over it, sister. I mean, it's like, you know, 2 years later, and you know, so yeah, the gravity of the offense. I mean, like, I was on the polar opposite of what Pat had to deal with.
What did the defendant's demeanor, did anyone notice it, or was it something, was it a kid?
It was a kid. They were both kids. Kids. They're probably around 20, something like that.
Do you think that factored in?
I think it did. It just seemed so trivial for 6 grown people to spend their day reviewing Love Gone Bad yet again. And it's just kind of like, you know, we showed on here for this, and that was the real like you said, the burden the state had was especially in misdemeanor court. It was one of those kind of cases like, this is really a crime, you know. And so, oh yeah, you got your 911. He pushed me up, boo-hoo-hoo. You know, it's you know, I mean, yeah.
Still on it. What you got?
Right, well, okay. I'm gonna serve, and I'm gonna follow the rules, but I'm gonna have some opinions next time. Because I had some opinions last time, and I just kept them to myself. I'm gonna have some opinions, and somebody's gonna have to exercise a strike in regard to those opinions, and so I will play a role, and if both sides say, well, we want this opinionated lawyer on our jury, well, then they'll get one. I'm sorry? Well, that's what I thought last time, just, it didn't work out. I mean, I'm not gonna do anything, Yolanda, outside the scope of the rules of a juror. But I'm not gonna sit there and not say anything like I did this last time. I'm just not gonna do it. I mean, they ask a question, I got an opinion.
I wanted to ask, because they're so different, yours was this one, yours was awesome, and you touched on it. Y'all say that they're watching everything, they're noticing everything, that is true, I think so, but, and they're harsh on the lawyers, you said. Do they make any comments about the complaint or the defendant? In other words, like, they think you guys said he looks guilty, or I didn't like the expression on his face, I don't like the way they addressed him, those kind of comments, like,
They did in my
They-
trial.
They didn't in mine. My defendant testified from a wheelchair the entire time. And I'm not sure why, and no one brought it up. And you would think that would be the kind of thing they would bring up. However, if one of the lawyers on either side did anything, they brought it up. And, that kind of goes into something else. If you're ever expecting to go back there after you've had a trial because they want to talk with you, or you want feedback about how you did or were you great or anything like